Rosie O'Donnell, ladies and gentlemen, on the phone on Ebro in the morning. How are
Well,
you,
hey.
Rosie? Give it up. You're calling in today because obviously you're a big supporter of Hillary Clinton.
Yes, I am.
And, you know, obviously you and Donald Trump are, how do I say this?
Not BFFs?
No, I've only met him in person like twice. Once was at his second wedding to Marla Maples, where I was a guest of one of the invitees, and the other time was once at the Survivor reunion. He happened to be there. I was hosting, but I've never really actually spoken to the man face to face. But I do find him moronic and divisive and dangerous.
From what you know, do you believe the rhetoric?
Well, I believe that he believes the rhetoric.
Got it.
I think that sadly that is, what he thinks. He's Machiavellian to the point of evil. It's all about him and what serves him, and I don't think he cares at all about anyone else in the world, even his own family. I mean, the way he talks about his daughter and the way he talks about women in general when he's the father of two daughters. I mean, he's a horribly destructive human being, and I think there's no credence to any of his claims.
Yeah, I mean, here at our radio station, I'm sure most of our audience is not a fan of his platform, the things he's saying. They may have watched his shows, and we know him here, obviously, from New York City, from real estate and all of his other promotions where he's promoted himself throughout the decades. But I don't really think that we have a lot of listeners that are in support of him. I just wanted to know if your disdain for him is it personal or is it really political as well?
Can it be both, Ebro?
Well,
It can. It absolutely can be
a
both.
A little bit of both, but it's long-standing. I'm 54 years old. I grew up on Long Island. So I grew up when he was, the guy who everybody made fun of as the idiot who had the plane that failed, and then, he was like a joke in a way.
Rosie, remember, what was it, Tour de Trump, the bicycle thing?
Exactly. Yeah, the whole thing he was like that poor rich kid that everyone hated in school who had no friends, who thought he was the best because his daddy was the richest. I don't know. He to me, has made a success out of logo slapping. He calls himself a builder, yet he doesn't build anything.
Yeah, he just puts his name on it and takes a fee.
Exactly. He licenses his name to people who think, listen, he claims that he's one of the richest men in the world. Do you ever see Warren Buffett selling steaks or ties?
Right.
He's a ridiculous charlatan in a day when the media has allowed him to perpetrate lies and dissent and, incite hate crimes without holding him accountable. And in the same way that when he came after me a decade ago, after I questioned whether or not he had the moral authority to be the arbiter of good behavior for 19-year-old girls, when he was the man who owned the beauty pageant, which
Right.
I believe were outlawed in the 70s. It's a ridiculous concept. And the fact that, he was allowed with impunity to slander and defame and denounce me for over a decade, now I kind of now it doesn't feel too good, does it, America? Look what he's doing to us.
Well, and look about it, and I want to move on and talk about Hillary, because we had the big debate in Brooklyn last night with Bernie and Hillary, and but I do think it's important. We've talked about on this program, Rosenberg, you've brought this up, that Trump's I guess popularity, for lack of a better term, really comes at the hands of his disrespect for the office of the president and what he did with Obama. And second guessing Obama's right to be president. And
his birth certificate.
Well,
he's really the father of the birther movement.
Right. Well, if you break it down to the least common denominator, he's a racist man.
There you go.
He's blatantly racist, and had it not been an African American president, he never would have had the guts, I think, to attack him with the constant veracity that he did. Remember when Obama was there and it was the press correspondence dinner, and all he did was make fun of him?
Yep.
All he did. It was like he was the laughing stock of that entire event. And anyone with a brain can see through his ridiculousness.
How much does it scare you that he's found this much support?
Well, I don't think he has as much support as he's saying, just like he doesn't have as much money as he's saying, just like he doesn't have the kind of respect or education that he claims he has. I'm very educated. I know a lot of words. I know a lot of the best words.
Terrific education.
When you break down his speeches, he's literally speaks at a third grade level. I don't know how he would have the intellect to speak to world leaders.
Yeah, but it's still scary, Rosie, when we see these people coming out to support Trump. Like when I see so many people, I was really shocked. That we even had one of our members of our show, Juanito, go out in Long Island, and he came back super emotional because he couldn't imagine how many people came out and they were so passionate about supporting
Trump. Well, and Juanito's
Trump.
Mexican, and on site they started being mean to him.
Well, it depends on where you look in a crisis, right? If there's something happening and you're going to focus on those idiots that showed up to chant for him, you really need to look at the thousands of people outside standing against him.
Right.
The people who just took their night to come and to stand and say, count me among those who believe that he is the force of evil.
Right.
There were just as many people standing there saying, we denounce everything that he represents. But it is terrifying to see sort of the Ku Klux Klan mentality come out behind the rocks they've been living under in order to stand in the light and be counted. That is a terrifying thing, I agree.
Rosenberg,
that's what the scary part is that people hear something like that, it gives them the right to feel like they can do it. Now, also, Laura, I should add, the reason Juanito came back upset, I learned later, was because the drive-thru to McDonald's was closed on his way to the rally. So it had nothing to do with that. Now, Rosie, I know you're a longtime supporter and friend, I'm sure, of the Clintons. Tell me first, before we get into why you support Hillary, what qualities you like, if any, in Bernie, and what maybe, if there was anything that made it hard to choose to really support Hillary and not Bernie.
It was never hard for me, although I admire him tremendously. And when I see his ads on television, I say, I completely agree with your ads. But, there's the great show Hamilton that's on Broadway now. There's a line that says, when you have skin in the game, you stay in the game, but you don't get a win unless you play in the game. Bernie can't run as an outsider when he's been part of the Washington establishment for so long. And the difference between him and Hillary in their careers in Washington is she's accomplished so many things, and he's accomplished so little. It's wonderful to have the ideals that he has, but life is not a musical, and life is not, the kind of simplistic rhetoric that he's trying to sell. He can't go in there and change this corporate oligarchy that we have right now, this unbelievably corporately owned society where we as human beings have to fight for our right to be human. I think that Bernie is a good man, and I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with him, but he is not the person that will lead the United States in this coming years, because I don't think he has the ability, the power, or the stamina.
Now, Rosie, I'll challenge you there in some ways, because first and foremost, we've had that same conversation on this program. We've been having it all morning, where it's like, look, in our heart of hearts, we love what Bernie says, and we love, what he's talking about, but we don't believe that when you get, or at least I don't, when you get to Capitol Hill, you just wave your hand and everything that you said when you were headed to Capitol Hill just happens.
That's right.
Not only that, he's been there. He's been there for years. And what has he accomplished? Nothing. Listen, he is that lone voice of the lefty liberal that lives inside the heart of every progressive person in the nation. And what he says is inspiring to me. I hate war. I agree. The Iraq War was an abomination. And when it was happening, I went on every talk show I could get on with no war spray painted on the back of every shirt I wore. It doesn't matter that you have that feeling if you have no way to implement it, right? Do his theories hold up in our hearts? They do, but are they practical? You remember in junior high school that one kid who ran for senior class president promising, every Wednesday you would have off and free ice cream and no homework.
That was me.
Well, that's really lovely. And when he got into he just can't do that, right? Can't do that. Those are fairy tale wishes.
Well, but the reason I say, Rosie, I'm going to challenge you is because don't we have to give credit? And don't we have to acknowledge that we needed Bernie in this conversation right now? Not only has he changed some of Hillary's stance or her position, but he's also really brought people into the political process that would have been asleep. He's woken a lot of people up.
Yes, and this is part of what it means to live in a democracy. And I believe I've sided with him on some issues that I don't side with Hillary. I am pro raising the minimum wage. I am completely against fracking. Like, there are things that Bernie Sanders stands for that I agree, but I don't think Bernie Sanders has the ability to fight against the gas and oil industry to make fracking all of a sudden be seen as the demon that it is. You know, there were movies and there are documentaries, but people seem to turn a blind eye because it's a multi-billion-dollar lobby that's able to influence people's opinions and make these horrible commercials with soft music. Isn't fracking wonderful? Like a ad from the 70s.
And isn't fracking was like a stopgap in between us moving away from oil, getting to the natural gas so we can get to other sources of energy. It was like a in between.
Right, but it's causing more damage to the environment than the oil ever has in our actual country. What it's been doing is killing farmers in the water and actually killing people.
Right.
You know, when that gas is let loose, there's no way to trap that without it leaking everywhere and poisoning people. And that documentary Gasland, which, you know, was absolutely profound and woke people up to what was happening. You know, every time that you bring something to the light that is innately a money-making venture, unless you have that kind of money to fight against that industry, you're doomed, you know? So I do believe in a lot of the ideals of Bernie. I do believe in that passionate, for lack of a better word, hippie rhetoric, that mentality that love and supporting the neighbor is of vital importance in American democracy and standing up for what's right. But do I think he is the leader that's going to take us there? No, I don't. Do I believe he's helped Hillary maybe see positions that she wouldn't have been forced to face, like minimum wage? Yes, and I think that's a beautiful and wonderful thing about democracy and this democratic process.
Now, Laura brought this up
Rosie's
earlier on the show. You know, last night in the debate in Brooklyn, there was a moment where Hillary made sure, and it was a phenomenal moment, where all of these questions are coming about her past and things that she's done and all the right political conversation.
But not once did they bring up women's issues.
And it's the first time we have a real chance to have a woman as a president, and it feels like no one is talking about women's issues.
Right. And to think that as a 54-year-old woman that we could still be having the argument of Roe v. Wade that was settled in 1973, the concept that we could still be having that argument now is absolutely shocking to me. And it's so depressing. So many levels. We are so behind other nations that have had female leaders for years and years and years, and it's about time for the United States. And should Hillary be a man, no one would ever question whether or not she was the most qualified. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. Bernie Sanders wouldn't have been able to make a dent in the record of a male Hillary Clinton. But because it is a female and we live in a sexist and a racist society, and those are the facts of our nation, that's the stew that we are all cooking in together, and to think that there are people who are somehow able to remove themselves from those influences is a fallacy.
Rosie O'Donnell, ladies and gentlemen, on Ebro in the morning. While we have you here, we know you're definitely pro-Hillary, and we appreciate you taking the time to call out. How do you feel about Hillary's past? Things like the usage of the word super predator, which we know at the time, and she's come out and apologized for. How do you feel about the crime bill in 1994? You obviously being older and being, I'm 41, so I remember the epidemic of gangs and crime in America of the late 80s and the 90s and crack in neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. How do you feel about her pivot?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a pivot. I think at that time you had members of African-American and low-income communities and minorities saying you have to do something. Our children are killing each other, again, with impunity in the streets, and no one is doing anything. And so at the time, that was considered something that was beneficial, but nobody was talking all those years ago about the military prison complex, right? That the privatized prisons, it's absolutely absurd. Now, if you read, like, The New Jim Crow, that book by Michelle Alexander, the prison system has been set up in order to continue with segregation and racism. It literally is institutionalized racism. And I don't think that Hillary Clinton is somebody who has ever been someone for a racist values. She is somebody who has fought against that as a woman, as a poor kid growing up who has self-made, and self-educated in a way where she has learned from her mistakes and from who she was at the time. Listen, I'm more concerned than I was about that super predator line, which I think is a full-quoted, I don't believe that Hillary Clinton is someone who feels that what is happening to black and minority Americans is something that doesn't concern her. I think it is a prime concern to her. But what's more concerning is that she voted for the war. Now, listen, it was hard to stand up and say you were not for war back in 2002, but people were doing it, and she didn't. And I think there was a tremendous amount of political pressure at that point for everyone to unite behind the president and behind the robbing of our civil rights. All of our civil rights were stolen under the guise of safety and of the 9/11 after effects. And as a result of that, we were ushered into this war. And I believe that, that was a goal of that administration, of the Bush administration, to get into war in the Mideast and to steal the oil of those Mideast nations in a way that was corrupt and divisive and horribly illegal.
Rosie up here dropping gems, y'all. Y'all better wake up. Rosie up here talking that talk this morning. Rosie, we appreciate
I was
you.
on in the afternoon.
Yo, listen.
I was awake.
Yeah, exactly. Look, Rosie, we appreciate you taking the time to chop it up with us this morning on Hot 97. And next Tuesday is the big day, ladies and gentlemen. The primaries take place. It feels like there's a lot of passion around this primary. I'm a registered independent, so whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be, that's who I'm going to rock with. Rosenberg,
same with me. I'm an independent as well. After when no one called for war crimes against George Bush after the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, I resigned as a Democrat, and I registered as an independent. So I, too, do not get to vote in the primary, but I will rock with the Democratic nominee as well.
Rosenberg, you believe it's a foregone conclusion that Hillary's wrapping this up?
Listen, I can't go as far as saying foregone conclusion. What I said was I really wish that if people wanted Bernie to win, they would have gotten more passionate sooner, because from a delegate standpoint, it's just very, very difficult for him to make up the ground. Latest polls have Hillary up, in the 13-point range coming in to Tuesday. So I do think it'll be very tough for Bernie. But like you said, I do think he's done a lot to help this conversation. And, I'll tell you, as time has gone on and I've read more and more about Hillary's platforms, I think Hillary is a little bit more liberal than she's getting credit for right now, because she's standing next to Bernie, and Bernie is such a great and staunch liberal. So I think as the Democrat and as a liberal, I think we'll have someone good, someone who will win come November.
Right, and someone who you can trust and believe in. When you look at someone, you have to know, do you think their essence is to serve? She has been a public servant for 50 years. She is somebody who has dedicated her life to serving the interests of the public and helping people who are not represented. I believe that her essence is good, and that goodness is needed in Washington, where the ability to be bought and sold is far too easy.
Now, Rosie, you have to admit, though, there is a piece of you that's like, God damn it, we're going to have a woman president in my lifetime.
Of course, and I felt the same way about Obama. I was in Detroit when Obama was elected. I was doing a movie with Ruby Dee, and the night that he won, I walked out of my hotel room and knocked on her door, and she opened her door, and we were just hugging each other in the hallway, crying at like midnight in the middle of Detroit, and it was the most beautiful moment of my life. I never thought I would live to see that, an African-American president. And I feel the same way about a woman. I feel like, yes, it's about time. And if you don't think that, African Americans are oppressed minorities in this country in the same capacity that women are, not equal, not that the experiences are exactly the same, but we are all in the pot of the non-chosen ones.
Damn,
Rosie O'Donnell, I didn't know where this conversation was going today, but Rosie, we appreciate you.
My pleasure. Anytime. I'm always up by 8, so give me a call when you need me.